Welcome to the Bogosity podcast for the 12th of November 2012, the podcast that gets the Edie's for its Wheaties. This is your host, Shane Killian. Let's privatize the news of the bogus. Of course, we all know that if you leave it to the private sector to distribute medicine to rural areas or third world countries, those greedy capitalists will just let those people suffer. Well, everyone that is except for scholars at Princeton University who set up a pilot program allowing the private market to provide affordable malaria medicine to Africans. Dubbed the Coca-Cola model, in reference to the drink maker's ability to get its products all over the world, including remote areas, at prices the poor can afford, this 2-year-old program has dramatically increased access to malaria medications by poor Africans and those who live in remote areas. Their findings were published in the November 2nd issue of the journal Science. One of the scholars behind the program is Ramanan Laxminarayan, who said, quote, "This experiment demonstrates that we can use private distribution mechanisms to make treatments available in rural areas." He went on to say that the program works because everyone at every step of the way makes a profit. Their goal was to make artemisinin combination therapy much more readily available to malaria patients, since artemisinin alone has resulted in resistant strains of malaria. Using subsidies from donors, they were able to significantly lower the price of this medicine in Ghana, Kenya, Madagascar, Niger, Nigeria, Tanzania, and Uganda. The project was organized by the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria, a public-private partnership founded in 2002 with seed money from several donors, including Microsoft founder Bill Gates. The program was highly criticized when it came out, with critics calling the model unproven and claiming that government healthcare workers distributing government-subsidized medicine was the best way. Right, because that's been working so well up to now. The authors of the study, on the other hand, are recommending that this model be expanded to more countries and should be extended to include the availability of better diagnostic tests. They also want to extend the program to other illnesses. Folks, the market model has worked pretty much every time it's been tried. We know the way. We know how to make healthcare better. Let's all drop our political biases and dogmas and get the government out of our way so we can do it here too. I know, last week I said I was tired of cops behaving badly stories, and that I'd only be covering them in more extreme situations. The problem is the extreme situations keep happening. Case in point, Daniel Jensen, a homeowner in Pinellas Park, Florida, who just wanted to keep his house from burning down. It started when his wife woke him up to alert him a neighbor's house was on fire. He grabbed a fire extinguisher and sprayed it until it was empty, then used a hose. According to Jensen, quote, "I was calling for my daughter and getting no response. I came out, grabbed the hose, and sprayed her room until I heard she was out. I was always taught to help when you can. Help is what I tried to do." He then took the hose and started soaking his fence and the back corner of his roof so the fire wouldn't spread to his property. At this point, firefighters had not yet arrived on the scene, but police had. They ordered him to back off, saying that insurance would pay for any damages. Yes, really. The fire then jumped to Jensen's back roof. Quote, "As I went to grab the hose, I hear an officer on this side. He said, 'Hit him, take him down, tase him.' I didn't know they were talking to me or about me. I was concerned about putting water on the fire, and the next thing you know, I'm being tased. It was horrible. I was lying in a puddle of water being electrocuted here by the people that are supposed to protect us. I'm trying to protect my family, my neighbor, and they bring harm to me. I don't understand it." Well, not electrocuted. He'd be dead if he were electrocuted, but it still wasn't pleasant. Jensen and his attorney are calling it an excessive use of force, made worse by the fact that it was in full view of his children. More and more we see police taking violent action against people who aren't being at all violent. Jensen broke no law. He was just hosing down his home. And they shot him in the back with a taser. He was no threat, not to his family, not to the police, not anyone. Why does it seem that more and more situations would turn out for the better if the police weren't there? Much was made of the abortion debate in this year's presidential race, which is complete Bogosity since the president has no power to overturn Roe v. Wade. Still, it serves as a reminder of the hideous damage social conservatives would do if they got their way when we see what happens in other countries that restrict abortions. Sativa Halappanavar was 17 weeks pregnant, a second trimester pregnancy, when she was admitted to a hospital in Ireland with severe pain. It turns out she was miscarrying, but since a fetal heartbeat was present, they weren't allowed to terminate the pregnancy. She and her husband Praveen were told, quote, "This is a Catholic country." She pointed out that she was neither Catholic nor Irish, but that made no difference to the law. Sativa then spent another 2.5 days in agony until her baby's heartbeat finally stopped. They then removed the dead fetus, and Sativa entered intensive care, where she died of septicemia. Understand, this pregnancy was self-terminating. There was no chance that the fetus would survive. The only question was how long it would hold on and what damage would be done to the mother in the process. Her cervix was fully dilated and she was leaking amniotic fluid, but what should have been a miscarriage that ended in a few hours went on for days. Sativa did not want to lose her baby. She was upset, but she came to accept reality. But since policymakers apparently haven't, there was nothing doctors could do. They weren't even allowed to induce labor. Sativa did not have to die. There is no reason to think that an otherwise perfectly healthy woman would die from doctors removing a miscarrying fetus. There just isn't any question that she would very likely be alive today were it not for this backwards and ignorant tyranny being imposed in Ireland. How can you possibly call yourself pro-life and then tolerate a law that results in the deaths of innocent women like Sativa? This is not hypothetical. It actually happens. Just ask Sativa's husband. If you're really pro-life, then you should work to keep abortion legal. And now it's time to itemize the intellectual deductions of this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And this week it goes to Huffington Post writer Jillian Berman for her bogus criticism of Papa John's CEO John Schnatter raising prices and scaling back workers' hours in order to offset the cost of complying with the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. Quote, Caleb Melby of Forbes has graciously done the math on Obamacare's cost to Papa John's, and according to his analysis, to cover the cost of Obamacare, the pizza chain would have to raise prices by 3.4 to 4.6 cents per pie. Way less than the 11 to 14 cents Schnatter claims he needs. Let's look at Melby's numbers, and Melby should probably share the title this week. He purports to break down Schnatter's numbers showing how much his expenses will increase. I'm going to assume the numbers that Melby provides are correct. He says that last year, Papa John's revenues were $1.218 billion and expenses were $1.131 billion. He then says that Schnatter's claim of 5 to 8 million increase is just a 0.4 to 0.7% increase. He doesn't tell you that it decreases profits by 5.7 to 9.1%, and this has an effect on pretty much everything, from what investors do to how much gets reinvested in the company to expand and hire more people. But that's not even the worst of it. He translates this into a mere 3.4 to 4.6 cent increase for every pizza sold. All he's proving here is that he doesn't understand basic supply and demand economics. Any price increase, even a meager one such as this, means fewer sales, which means he has to raise the price even higher to compensate, which reduces sales even further, and so on, until the new equilibrium is reached. Melby also doesn't even understand the basics of how prices are set. For example, as of this recording, Papa John's offers several pizzas for an even dollar amount, such as a medium pepperoni for $11 and a large bacon and 6 cheese for $16 even. They did this because of consumer demand. Does Melby honestly think that Papa John's did the math and the proper price for all these pizzas just happened to be even dollar amounts? No. If Papa John's raises the price of a medium pepperoni from $11 to $11.04, they lose that positive reaction that customers have to the even price, and fewer people buy pizzas. Think about it. If Papa John's could raise the price to $11.04 and still sell the exact same number of pizzas, why wouldn't they do it already and gain all those extra revenues? Why weren't they already getting that extra $5 to $8 million Melby seems to think is so easy to raise? If you understand this, congratulations, you're already doing better than most liberal pundits. Then it's a tiny step to understand the next implication of this. Schnatter will make no extra profits if he raises prices any more than he has to, because again, if he thought he could, he would have done it already. Melby doesn't understand this, and neither does Berman. Nor does she seem to understand the basics of what a promotion is and what it really costs to run it. Quote, "And there are other changes the chain could make to save money," Melby notes, like not giving away 2 million pizzas for free at a cost of between $24 and $32 million to the company, for example. How the hell would that save money? That was a promotion designed to increase sales and therefore revenues down the road. Does Berman not understand that? Further, does she not understand that there is all the difference in the world between a one-time promotional expense designed to increase sales and a permanent increase in the cost of doing business, costs that have nothing to do with selling pizzas or increasing market share? It's just desperation. She wants to cover up the real costs of her Lord and Savior's policies. How anyone could have thought that Obamacare would cover more people and cover more kinds of treatments and cover pre-existing conditions and still be cheaper is beyond me. And beyond anyone capable of doing basic math for that matter. But once again, we see that statism poisons the mind just as much as religion does, which is why Jillian Berman, Caleb Melby, and anyone else complaining about rising prices or lower wages in the wake of Obamacare blow away all other contenders for this week's biggest Bogon emitter. And now it's time to wipe off the map this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! And this week it goes to the Bakery, Confectionery, Tobacco Workers, and Grain Millers International Union. Referred to by people who don't like overly long appellations as the Bakers Union. Unions are there supposedly to protect jobs, but this one somehow managed to not only cost jobs of thousands of their members, as well as members of other unions, but also to take down one of the most beloved household names of the last several decades. Hostess Brands Incorporated is a company that makes products from Wonder Bread to Twinkies. Late last year, it was faced with potential bankruptcy issues because of the down economy. In January, they filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. They found the only way they could stay in business was to cut $200 million in costs, which includes $40 million in wages and $75 million in pensions. The unions weren't pleased, but Hostess reached an agreement with their largest union, the International Brotherhood of Teamsters. The Teamsters voted to accept a new contract with reduced wages and benefits, understanding the position that Hostess was in and the need for belt tightening. According to Ken Hall, Secretary-Treasurer for the Teamsters, quote, "Unfortunately, the company's operating and financial problems were so severe that it required steep concessions from a variety of stakeholders. Teamster Hostess members, based on the facts and advice from respected restructuring advisors, understood what was at stake and voted to protect all jobs at Hostess." But the Bakers Union didn't, and this prompted Hostess to go into bankruptcy court. They attempted a reorganization, but the Bakers Union wouldn't budge an inch. On November 9th, their workers went on strike, causing the company to lose $7.5 to $9.5 million. Hostess warned, and the Teamsters agreed, that a widespread strike would spell the end of the company. Hostess was forced to shut down 3 plants on the 12th and told the workers that if they couldn't reach an agreement by the 15th, it would mean the end of the company. They still didn't relent. Now, the only option left to Hostess is to liquidate, selling its assets to the highest bidders. The cost of wrapping up operations will be some $41 million, and the liquidation should generate about $77 million, partly financed by a $75 million bankruptcy loan. It's not likely that their private equity owner, Ripplewood Holdings LLC, will be able to recover anything. Really, what were the people at the Bakers Union thinking? The union's president, Frank Hurt, said, quote, "It's just way over the top. It was an untenable position for our people." Really? Any worse than not having a job? Any worse than over 18,000 workers, most of whom aren't a member of your union, being put out of work? Hurt seemed almost insane, waxing on like a conspiracy theorist. Quote, "Our members know that the plans all along of the Wall Street investors currently in control of this company did not include the operation of Hostess brands any longer than it takes to sell the company in whole or in part in a way that will maximize the profits of these vulture capitalists regardless of the impact on the workforce." Right, because liquidating a respected 82-year-old business with household brand recognition is such a good way to make money. It's just too bad the Bakers Union wasn't a good steward of their members like the Teamsters were. But the fact is, high wages and pensions represent money that has to come from somewhere. And if it isn't there, the only two options are to reduce wages and pensions or go out of business entirely. Econ 101. The Bakers Union either doesn't understand that, or they don't care, preferring instead to push their own political agenda at the expense of their own members' livelihoods. Either way, this action, going completely against the Bakers Union's stated goals, and indeed the whole point of even having unions in the first place, is more than enough to get them named this week's Idiot Extraordinaire! Well, that wraps up this floxy-nousy nihilopilificating edition of the Bogosity podcast. Please visit the forums at Bogosity.tv, where you can read the show notes and join the discussion on these and other subjects. This podcast is free but not free to produce, so please use the donate button at the top of the Bogosity.tv website or down the right-hand side of the podcast page and give generously to keep this podcast going. And if you'd like to contribute to the podcast, just send a question, statement, news article, or rant to podcast@bogosity.tv. Put it in an audio file, and if it's good enough, it'll get played right in the podcast. Thank you for listening. Until next time, here's a quote from Harry Browne. Given the results of the war on poverty and the war on drugs, if the government starts a war on abortion, in 5 years, men will be having abortions. The Bogosity podcast is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives 3.0 Imported License. Bogosity. Christmas time is coming, and the most classic of Christmas stories is A Christmas Carol. But how much do you know about the original Charles Dickens novella? Have you dismissed it as a children's book with one-dimensional characters amounting to nothing but platitudes and cliches? Maybe your appreciation of the book was even muted by those dry, boring, annotated books they made you read in school. My book, the sarcastically annotated A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, uses both facts and humor to present the book in a way you probably haven't seen it before. Giving praise when deserved and beratement when warranted, this book is put in the perspective of its time and shows a dimensional, multi-layered Ebenezer Scrooge from start to finish. Skepticism, history, and even economics are employed to show the book in relation to today in an easily accessible format. Appreciate the Christmas of your youth all over again. Get the sarcastically annotated A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, available at Amazon and on PDF as well.